This video will take you through the full story of the attack on Pearl Harbor in one continuous narrative. On the morning of the 7th of December, 1941, the Hawaiian Islands were bathed in peaceful sunlight. Pearl Harbor lay calm, and the entire naval base was filled with an atmosphere of routine and relaxation. Meanwhile, about 370 kilometers north of Hawaii, the Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet was fully prepared for war. 6 aircraft carriers stood ready as part of Japan's strike force. They were about to launch a surprise attack on the United States Pacific Fleet. At Pearl Harbor, hundreds of Japanese aircraft took off from the carriers, flying across the vast Pacific Ocean and heading directly toward their target. When the first Japanese torpedo struck an American battleship, the silence of the morning was shattered. Explosions followed in rapid succession, and multiple U.S. warships were heavily damaged. This was the attack that shocked the world, Pearl Harbor. The surprise strike pulled the United States directly into World War II. It also set Japan on a path toward a prolonged war that would ultimately lead to its defeat in the Pacific. Many people later asked, why did Japan risk everything to challenge a far stronger nation? Japan's expansionist path began in the late 19th century, after the First Sino-Japanese War in 1895. Japan defeated China and forced the Qing dynasty to sign the Treaty of Shimonoseki. Japan gained control over Taiwan and the Penghu Islands and forced China to recognize Korea's independence, effectively placing Korea under Japanese influence. Japan's ambitions in East Asia and the Pacific raised serious concerns in the United States. At the same time, the United States had completed its continental expansion and began turning its attention toward the Asia-Pacific region. After the Spanish-American War in 1898, the United States defeated Spain and gained control of the Philippines, Guam, and annexed Hawaii. It also restricted Japanese immigration in Hawaii, which angered Japan. By this point, American and Japanese interests in the Western Pacific were directly facing each other. Tensions continued to rise. After the Boxer Rebellion in 1900, the United States proposed the open-door policy in China, opposing any single power, especially Japan, from monopolizing Chinese territory. This marked the beginning of strategic rivalry between the two nations in East Asia. In 1904, Japan went to war with Russia over Manchuria and Korea. The United States remained neutral but quietly supported Japan to weaken Russian influence in the region. However, Washington also feared Japan's rising ambitions. In 1905, U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt mediated the Treaty of Portsmouth, ending the war. Japan gained influence in Manchuria but was denied war reparations, leading to domestic unrest and anti-American sentiment. The United States aimed to prevent Japan from dominating Northeast Asia, which could threaten its Pacific interests. After World War I broke out in 1914, European powers were consumed by war. Both Japan and the United States turned toward German possessions in the Pacific and influence in China. Japan seized German territories in the Pacific Islands. The United States later sought joint administration but faced resistance from Japan. At the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, Japan demanded control over German rights in Shandong, China. Although initially tolerated, this decision triggered protests in China's May 4th movement and pressure from American public opinion. The United States later opposed Japan's monopoly, but Japan still retained its gains. In response, the U.S. Senate refused to ratify the Treaty of Versailles, deepening tensions. Between 1921 and 1922, the Washington Naval Conference was held to limit Japanese expansion. Japan was forced into naval limitations under the Five-Power Treaty, 5-3 ratio between the U.S., Britain, and Japan, weakening its naval ambitions. In the 1930s, the Great Depression spread globally, collapsing economies and intensifying competition for resources. Japan, lacking oil, rubber, and iron ore, was particularly vulnerable. To maintain its industrial and military system, Japan increasingly relied on foreign expansion. In 1931, Japan occupied northeast China after the Mukden incident and established Manchukuo. In 1937, The Marco Polo Bridge incident marked the beginning of full-scale war in China. By 1941, Japan occupied southern French Indochina, revealing its southern expansion strategy. The United States responded by freezing Japanese assets and imposing a full oil embargo. Britain and the Netherlands followed. This cut off Japan's primary oil supply, creating a critical resource crisis. Japan now faced a choice: retreat or war. By 1941, Japan was trapped. Negotiations between Japan and the United States failed. Hardliners within the military believed withdrawal would destroy Japan's position in Asia. In October 1941, General Hideki Tojo became prime minister and consolidated military control. Diplomacy continued on the surface, but war preparations were already underway. Japan concluded that only a rapid strike could secure its survival. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who had studied in the United States, strongly opposed war. He understood America's industrial power and warned that Japan could not win a prolonged conflict. However, he was ultimately forced to follow orders. Yamamoto proposed a bold plan: a surprise carrier strike against Pearl Harbor. 6 aircraft carriers would secretly sail across the North Pacific and launch a surprise attack. The goal was to destroy the U.S. Pacific Fleet in a single blow. Japan believed this would force the United States to negotiate within months. Japan assembled approximately 423 aircraft, including Zero fighters, torpedo bombers, and dive bombers. The fleet sailed under strict radio silence. 2 attack waves were prepared. Intelligence identified Sunday morning as the moment when U.S. defenses would be weakest. At 7:49 a.m., the attack began. Radar detected incoming aircraft, but misidentified them as friendly forces. Within minutes, Pearl Harbor was under attack. The first wave struck battleships and airfields. The second wave followed shortly after. By 9:45 a.m., the operation was complete. The United States suffered severe losses. 8 battleships were damaged, including the destruction of USS Arizona and USS Oklahoma. Dozens of other ships were damaged or destroyed. Nearly 200 aircraft were lost, and air defenses were crippled. However, Japan failed to achieve its strategic objectives. The U.S. aircraft carriers were not in port and survived. Fuel depots and repair facilities were left intact. Command infrastructure was also untouched. These failures allowed the United States to quickly recover and continue the war. Japan lost only 29 aircraft. On the 8th of December 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt delivered the Day of Infamy speech. The United States declared war on Japan. Shortly after, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. America entered World War II on 2 fronts. The U.S. rapidly shifted into a wartime economy, producing massive amounts of weapons, ships, and aircraft. Between 1942 and 1945, American industrial output surpassed all other nations combined. Japan, meanwhile, expanded rapidly across Asia in early 1942, but its supply lines stretched too far and became unsustainable. In June 1942, Japan attempted to lure the U.S. fleet into a decisive battle at Midway. However, American intelligence had broken Japanese naval codes and knew the plan in advance. On June 4, U.S. carrier forces launched a surprise counterattack. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers were destroyed. The Battle of Midway marked the turning point of the Pacific War. Japan lost its offensive capability and was forced into defense. From 1943 onward, American submarine warfare destroyed Japan's supply chains. By 1944, Japan's oil imports had fallen to a fraction of their former levels. Its military became increasingly crippled by fuel shortages. By 1945, the United States had overwhelming industrial and military superiority. The war ended with the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and Japan's surrender in Tokyo Bay. Looking back, the attack on Pearl Harbor did not secure Japan's victory. Instead, it awakened a nation with unmatched industrial power and determination. It changed the course of history forever. Military expansion built on miscalculation ultimately leads to disaster. Peace remains the only sustainable path forward.